Hey everybody, in this video I'm going to teach you everything that I know about writing an FACGCE. So we're going to start with some basics, which is general things that you need to know in order to even begin writing in the tuning. And then we're going to talk a little bit about riff writing strategies, or how I go about writing some of the ideas that I play. And then we're going to wrap up with some stuff for more advanced students, such as strategies for mapping out the fretboard and ways that you can go about getting more complex and specific sounds. So without further ado, let's get started. All right, to kick things off, the first thing we want to do is take a look at the open notes of the tuning in order to decide on a key. And when we're picking a key, we want to pick a key that best utilizes the open notes so that we can use every single note, if possible, in our ideas. FACGCE then adds up to an open F major 9 sound. And in the world of music theory, a major 9 chord belongs as either the 1 chord or the 4 chord within our diatonic or just major scale. So if I'm picking a key, the most logical ones that will allow me to use all of these open notes would be F major, since all of these notes belong to the key of F major, or the key of C major, where this open F major 9 chord would be the 4 chord. Now, for me, when it comes to picking these two keys, and you don't necessarily need to even use these two, but I think they would be the easiest choice. When it comes to picking a key, I like to think about the color that you will get in one key versus another. So if we play in F major, the tone that we're going to get will probably be a bit darker, based on the way that these open notes will support chords that we're probably going to play and use. And if we play in the key of C major, the sound's probably going to be a bit brighter, as this sound will really support the 4 chord, which is an F major 9 chord, which is exactly what we have here. So for me, I tend to write a lot of bright sounding stuff. So C major is my preference, though I've tried F, and F is also pretty good. So anyways, for our video, we're going to start by writing in the key of C major. And if we're writing in C, the first thing that we want to do is find some C notes on the lowest 2 strings. And the reason that we want to do that is we're going to use bass notes from the key of C in order to help us begin our orientation in the tuning. So how do we even find a C sound? Well, an easy thing to do is to take a look at the notes again. We have F, A, C. So this pitch here is going to be our key center. So now what I want to do is try and find that note on the lowest string. So we know that this is F, so it's obviously not going to be a C, so we could work our way up a bit. This is going to be an A. So that's a C right here on the 7th fret. So now that we've got C here, we can start to build major scales in order to map out the notes. So a major scale is a pattern that goes whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. So we can just start on C here and apply that pattern. So we've got whole step, half step, whole step, and then we're back to the root. Now this gets pretty high up, so maybe just knowing the fretboard up to like fret 14 in the key of C, that's probably good enough for now. And we have a lot of runway here, so we want to work our way down. So we've got these notes that are also available to us. And in terms of knowing the note names, C major is probably the easiest system to work with, because it's just the alphabet going from C. So if you know the pattern here, then you can just go up the alphabet from C, and that will tell you the names of the notes that you're playing. So we have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, which is pretty easy. And we can descend from C, and as long as we know what notes we can play, then we can attach the note names. So we have C, B, A, G, and F. And so the next thing that we want to do is repeat this process again on the A string. So again, we can listen for our C sound. And actually, one more tip: if you know the note names in standard on the A string, then this A string is exactly the same. So we don't even need to really use the sound here if we already know that C is on the 3rd fret. So again, we can go whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. And now we have the notes of C major on the A string. So what can we do with this? Well, for me, everything with writing begins with chords. So I think a good strategy is to try and just create chord shapes based on these notes that we've lined out here. Like if we were in standard tuning, I would go through the scale and harmonize each note of the scale with a certain chord shape. And we can do that here, but because we have all these nice open notes, we can make sounds that are not quite as difficult to play that will still sound pretty good. So let's say we start at the note C. Like a simple strategy that you could do is to just find another note that's fretted and see if that sounds good with your C note. So this sounds like a fourth. So this would be a third here. So I could just try and play this sound and rig up the notes. And maybe that's a chord I want to use. I could maybe add another note in to make things more interesting. So this sounds like another C. So now we have this sound here. And you don't actually need to even know what these sounds are. I'm just using my ear here. But if you just hear this and you think it sounds good, then that's good enough for now, right? So I just played this sound. I'm not a big fan of that. That sounds a little better to me. That sounds pretty good. But again, let's just scale it back to 2 notes. So I like these 2. And then we can just play the rest as open notes. And now I have a structure that I can work with. And we could continue this process, just going on different degrees of the scale, creating chords. Now again, the reason that we want to use chords is that chords are the basis for pretty much everything that at least I do, and I think that you should do too. Because chords give you a predetermined structure that you can use to start building your ideas. So if we start with an interval, that makes life easy. We can tack on more notes. Like I think that's kind of a cool sound. And when you find a cool sound, you can use that as a starting point for writing an idea. And I'll go into that in a second here. Also, try to listen for sounds that you already know. So, for example, I really like shell voicings, which are 7th chords that are devoid of the 5th. So if I listen to a sound like this sounds like the start of a shell voicing. And then we have the last note of the shell voicing. So a shell voicing is possible to play in FACGCE, and if I find that, that's a structure that's known to me in my ear, and I can totally use that and apply all the same ideas that I would have done in standard, like using this as a template to start with, and then maybe I can move some of the notes around to create a different shape that has a similar look and feel, but with slightly different sound. So here's another strategy that you can try as well. If you know a fingering in standard, sometimes when you just start with fingerings, that can be a cool way to take a shape. Like if I take a major 7 shape, again, a shell voicing major 7 shape, and I just apply it to, say, the note F, well, I get this really nice sound here. And so, regardless of what the music theory is, if I like this shape, then I can use this as something that I can start kind of building on. And this is another shape that I would use in standard. It's not going to be the same chord, but it gets me started with some sound that I can work with here, right? And I know that I'm starting, again, on a bass note that's in my key, which at the very least gives me some kind of frame of reference. So we had our approach of starting with like a 2-note interval and just adding notes. We had the approach of taking a shape that we already know and just seeing what it sounds like in the tuning. And now we can kind of move on to thinking about some more light music theory stuff to inform our decisions. So for me, when I'm writing ideas, I like to start building on certain chords or scale degrees. For example, if I want it really kind of resolved and happy sound, I'll build something based off the 1 chord or based on the note C in the key of C major. If I want something more 21st century pop / emo, I'll start on the note F or the 4 chord. If I want a minor sound, I'm going to play something based on the relative minor of C, which will be A minor. So I'll start on the note A, and then I'll try and construct a cool chord based off this A scale degree that has a minor feel to it. So I like this one here, which kind of has a minorish vibe. Well, definitely not that. So this one sounds pretty good to me. This sounds like an A minor add 9 chord. So if I like this sound, then I would start with it. So in terms of the writing, as I've said before, it all begins with chords. So if we find a cool chord shape, then what we can do is we can try and build a riff or lick based on it. So I always like to take these shapes here and just arpeggiate them as kind of the start of an idea. Now, what we can do is we can add little flourishes or embellishments to the sound. So let's say I have a sound like this. I could maybe try doing a little hammer-on into the root of the chord. And that could be the start of an idea. Also, rhythm is pretty important with this kind of thing. So it's not even necessarily about how complicated the fingering is. It's also about what kind of phrasing you're using when you're writing the idea. Try and maybe vocalize the rhythm before you play. Tap your feet to create some kind of pulse, and take your time. Like sometimes I'll spend 20 minutes writing 4 seconds of music because I put a lot of effort into creating small, fine details and little gestures that are hopefully new to me when I play. So it's a good way to also like learn and step out of your comfort zone. So let's say that we do something like that, or we could try doing we could try hammer on into each note of the chord here, and maybe that creates a little gesture. We could play the second note. We could play, the first note to the second note, and then we could just try doing some arpeggio stuff slash try adding in some of these open notes here. So we could, if we put some rhythm to it, then maybe that could be the start of a riff, again, based on a chord. And then we could add in a sound like that. Let's try another example. So let's say I have a sound like this one here. So this is a D minor 7 chord. Again, it doesn't really matter a whole ton as long as you know that this is the note D and you have some sense of, is this a major or minor chord? You can kind of work with that and build from there. But if I have a sound like this, right, I could maybe like apply some kind of picking pattern to it, like, and then maybe add a little lick to it. And then go from there, right? And maybe either repeat it or move on and add another chord to the sound. So let's say that we want to add another chord to the sound here. So I'm going to go a little slower just to make sure that I can actually play this. So we're going to have... So let's say I do a little slide here. One technique that I like to do is treat my note that I've slid up to as the upper note of some other kind of chord. So what I can do is just fish around for a shape that's going to sound good on this note here. So maybe like that will sound good, or this, or maybe something like that. So now I'm going to have something like that, which sounds like a riff that I probably would play, write, or just work with. So anyways, that's basically my approach to writing ideas. We start with a chord. We use that as the basis for the sound. We do arpeggios and we add little flourishes to them, hammer-ons, pull-off slides, legato, etc. So if you're looking for more to do at this more basic level, then spend time creating chord shapes, because chord shapes are everything, right? If you want to do more than just these simple interval kind of things, then see if you can create chords that don't even have any open notes. Another benefit of playing in an open tuning is that it allows you to play chords that you never would be able to play in standard because all of the things are lined up differently. So try and take advantage of that, whether it's with open notes or without open notes. And when you find a chord that's refreshing and exciting to you, then try and give it its due and build something around it. Anyways, let's move on to the next segment where we'll talk a little bit about some fretboard mapping strategies for advanced players. Okay, so if we're mapping out the fretboard, then a good place to start is with building scales. And we've already done that on the lowest 2 strings. But what we want to do is extend our knowledge to every single string. And so a good place to start is to find the root notes. So if we have a C here, we have a C here, we have a C right here, and we're going to have a C here, C here, and a C right here. So from this, we can build a major scale just like we did on the lowest 2 strings based off of every single note. Now, this is something that I've done in some of my other videos, so we're not going to go through it in each beat here just to save a little time, but maybe actually I'll do one. So let's say that we have a C on the open C string. Well, we can just go like that, and use that to figure out what the scale is. Actually, one thing I want to say to you, like let's say we have scales figured out on these 3 strings. So I think it's a good idea to work one string at a time and try and just get familiar with these slowly. So let's say that we have these 3 strings kind of figured out. It's a good idea to just play around with the notes and try and figure out little patterns and ideas and just like improvise basically around the notes to kind of quiz yourself on what's going on. So let's say I just do something like that, right? Where I'm just kind of fishing around. Like you can try and put together chord shapes and try and visualize the scale as you go. Like you could take something like this chord here and try morphing it into something else. Once we get comfortable with these strings and we can move around them pretty freely, we can add in another string. So let's say we add in this string. Again, our root is right here. Don't lose track of the roots. The roots are going to keep you oriented. So let's say So I'm just freely kind of messing around and improvising here and just trying to see the scale as I go. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is something that you can do when you're warming up to the tuning, and it'll help you when you write. And one little trick here, actually, in this tuning, all of the notes between 5 and 7, these are all in the key of C. So you can play all of these notes here and they'll work fine. And you know, if you at least have something like that you can kind of build on, then that should help you to get to know the fretboard a little bit better. So once again, work on scales, going one string at a time. Start by learning where the roots are, and then build your scales out from there. And then use improvisation and building chords and writing as a means to actually learn the scale and aim to try and visualize it. So in terms of another strategy that I like to do what's called a diatonic sequence, which is when you take an initial structure or set of notes and you move it through the scale, going up one note at a time on each string. So for example, if we have a sound like this, we have the note C and we have the note E. So I can take a sound like this here and I can sequence it by moving each note in my little chord here up the scale. So imagine that each string has a C scale on it. So if I move this note C up to the next note in the scale, it's going to be D. So my finger is going to move up here. And this E is going to move up to F. And so that's going to give me another sound. Now if I do the same thing, our F is going to move up to G. And we're going to have another very structurally similar sound. Do the same thing, so E moves up to F and G moves up to A, and we have another sound. And we can keep going until we have a set of chords. So this is a great way to learn the fretboard because not only does it test your knowledge of what's actually happening here, but it also will help you to carve out chord shapes that you can actually use, which is super duper useful in terms of building your vocabulary. So I really encourage you to start practicing sequences if you're looking for things to do in a tuning. If you find a chord that you like, try sequencing it so that you have a series of shapes that share roughly a similar structure to that initial chord that you found. If you do that, it'll really, really help to improve your vocabulary. I promise. Anyways, so that's all I have to say on FACGCE for now. I hope you found this video useful, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.